I want to welcome you tonight, and we're grateful that you can join us for this conversation in a series of webinars that we've been doing as Women in Leadership of Mennonite Church USA. These webinars have held space for us during what would have been our in-person Women Doing Theology conference. Since we can't meet in person, it's been a gift to be able to gather with all of you in these different spaces online, and grateful that this has drawn us together in new and different ways and has made this accessible. And I see we have someone from Paraguay here tonight, and we've had international friends joining us as well. So grateful for the opportunities, even as much as we mourn being able to be physically together. My name is Melissa Florer-Bixler. I am by day the pastor of Raleigh Mennonite Church, and I also am a member of the steering committee for Women in Leadership. As we enter into this conversation tonight on anti-patriarchy, anti-patriarchal futures, and our church, I want to invite you to take a moment to center yourselves through prayer and breath. Will you join me? Creator God, you have made us for good, to thrive and flourish in the reign of God's liberating love. We breathe in your goodness. We breathe out your joy. Creator God, the world is burning. The fires of racism and sexism, of climate destruction and political malpractice threaten destruction. We breathe in your righteous anger. We breathe out your justice. Creator God, as we come together tonight, we recognize these bodies, flesh and blood and bone, survive the unsurvivable as we carve out spaces between the burning embers of our world. Help us to find what we need here among your people, among our people. We breathe in your liberation. We breathe out our hope. Amen. Friends, it's a joy to be with you as we are together for a conversation between me and our special guest, one of the matriarchs of our church, one of the women who has gone before us, who has cleared a path for women like me to walk on. I would not be here today if Iris had not gone ahead and made a way. And so I is with incredible gratitude and reverence that I introduce Iris de León-Hartshorn, who has served in numerous roles in the Mennonite Church over the previous decades. She currently serves as Associate Executive Director of Operations and the Director of Human Resources for Mennonite Church USA. Not sure how she fits that onto her business card, but that is her title. But Iris has also been MCUSA Director of Transformative Peacemaking, a Conference Minister for Pacific Northwest Mennonite Conference, and the Director of Peace and Justice Ministries for Mennonite Central Committee. She also earned a master's degree in conflict transformation from Eastern Mennonite University. Iris was born in Laredo, Texas, and her life has been shaped by her culture as a Latina and by the significant presence of music in her life. Iris has an eclectic church background, spanning from the Catholic Church of her birth all the way to Southern Baptists in California. She came to the Mennonite Church through her work with Mennonite Central Committee, and she now lives in Portland, Oregon, where she worships with the people of Portland Mennonite Church. Really grateful to spend some time in conversation with you tonight, Iris.
I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. So Iris, I wonder if you could start off by telling us a little bit about the first time that you became aware of how patriarchy was going to work in your life and how you fit into the structures of power around you as a girl.
Well, for me, I was thinking about it, and then, I thought, oh, thinking about college and this, that, and then I thought, really when I first kind of hit, want to talk about, hitting the limit as being female was when I was fairly young. I have three sisters and myself, four sisters, and no brothers. And in the Mexican American community, that was actually a gift to me and my sisters, because a lot of my friends had brothers, and back then you were expected to cater to your brother. Anything your brother wanted, you would, if he wanted a sandwich, you had to go make it for him. Everything was centered around the males around the house. But since I didn't have a brother, we didn't have to do that. And so my father treated us a lot like sons, in the sense that we played every sport. My father kept telling us we could be anything we wanted to be. And I believe that. And then I hit school. And then I started to get the message of, no, you can't be everything. You can't be whatever you want to be. There's limits to what girls can do. Um, I mean, I even remember in high school when I was dating, a lot of Latinos at our school and white. And pretty soon I noticed that none of the Latino guys were asking me out. I thought, what's going on? And one of my friends says, you know what the rumor is about you and your sisters, don't you? And I said, no, what is it? And they said that the De Leon girls won't make good wives because they're too independent. So that was the scoop around high school. So so then I just realized that, okay, yeah, it's going to be a rough road.
Yeah.
For a while.
So you really knew from like you had very early experiences of understanding that sort of your liberation would be at odds with the culture that you were in. And I wonder now you work in a predominantly white institution, and I'm curious about the ways that patriarchy has manifest itself in your culture of origin in ways that's similar or different than how you've seen patriarchy working itself in white institutions that you've been in.
Well, I've thought a little bit about this because I wonder how much of white patriarchy has influenced Latino men compared to, if you weren't influenced by that. It's still patriarchy, but it's different. Like in our family, and to Maribel, we were talking about this, is everyone that I know, Mexican American, I'm not saying every family's the same, everyone knows that the mother is in charge. She's in charge of the household, of doing, paying the bill, everything. She's the boss. That's it. And your father, in public, you have to make your father look like he's in charge, but he really isn't. But that's part of our culture, so that in public you would cater to your father, you would look up to him, but at home that wasn't the reality. So so you have strong women in Latino culture. That's not unusual. But you also, this is the way you show respect for the males, and it's in public. It doesn't translate at home in the same way, except for if you have a brother. I just don't get that whole brother thing, but that's different. I think when I look at white patriarchy, like in institutions, and when I talk about this, I'm talking about a system. So I don't, I can hear maybe some people will say, well, you know, especially a white male might say, well, I don't do that. Or I'm talking about a system that we all participate in, whether we want to or not. And sometimes we all protect it at some points, whether we want to or not. So I don't want people to get defensive of when I talk about this in a systemic way. So when I talk about white institutions, for me, in the US, it's about protecting white privilege. White patriarchy is protecting the white privilege of males. Males set the standards, you know, how we do work. You know, if we look at our education system, especially higher ed, they have been the ones to, you know, provide the framework of that. I mean, almost every institution, they've had a hand in um, doing the framework for those institutions in the United States. But what I find disturbing and what's hard is that, and what I've experienced is that they also decide who should be accountable for things and what happens. But when it comes to them being accountable for certain things, they turn it around and all of a sudden it becomes a thing of entitlement. So now they're not accountable because they're entitled to it. And so this has been the systemic reality of what I've seen in our institutions. And it's, you know, it's frustrating. And I think sometimes we don't even see it happening. We don't even realize it's going on. But there is different dynamics. And I think, you know, Mexican American culture on males.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, just curious if you could just talk a little bit about what your work has been in the institution. You know, we've had several different roles, both in the Mennonite Church, but also in Mennonite Central Committee, and yeah, how you ended up in your current role, and what's that been like for you as a Latina?
Well, I want to say something. Well, we'll lead into it, but one of the things I was thinking about was times of reflection and times that my thinking really changed as I started to think about what I was going to be doing and entering work in the church. And in my early 20s, I read a book, and I cannot remember the name of it, but it was the first time I was introduced to this whole thing of what now is called Cinderella Syndrome. You know, this idea as a female, you get married to Prince Charming, and he's going to take all your problems away, and you're going to live happily ever after. I'm still waiting, but anyway. Anyway, so that was a eye opener for me because I never felt that way, but I knew a lot of my friends felt that way, that was going to happen somehow, some way. The other one was I here with the Dominican sisters in Houston, Texas, when we were there, doing a study on the Enneagram, and that's it was first practiced by the Sufi, and it's gone down, and the Catholic Church uses it a lot, kind of to find out who God created you to be, what is really your center of who you are. And so I did the Enneagram, and when you're given a number, and so when I found out my number, there was quite a bit of resistance because in my head I knew it was true. I wanted it to be something else. And so that started giving me an idea of probably where I was heading. I knew that I probably wasn't going to be quiet about things, that I would probably, you know, be quite vocal, probably pushy even, when I have to be. So that was another one. And then before I started ministry, I did 2 years of CPE, clinical pastoral education. And that's when I tried to decide, my husband and I were trying to decide whether we co-pastor or not. And I could co-pastor with him. I mean, we get along well, but that's when I decided, you know what, I need my own identity as a pastor. And so I did, after the CPE, I was worked for hospice for 4.5 years. And that was also another life-changing experience of being with over 300 families around a death of someone that they loved, and the reconciling of families, and also seeing some of the damage actually that patriarchy had done in a lot of those families, and some of the sad situations of, you know, when I think of patriarchy does damage not just to women but to men. I think, you know, it doesn't allow, it tries to define men, and so back then, you know, men were to be strong and stuff, and so there was sometimes a lot of distance between them and their children because of holding back their emotions. So that was kind of the start. But I was on the board for MCC Central States when we were in Houston, and then one day I got a call from MCC in Akron, and they said, would you like to come to MCC US and apply for a position that we have as Director of Peace and Justice? And I said, well, you know, what would that mean? They said, well, you had to move to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. See, I was born in Laredo, but I grew up in Southern California on the beach. I couldn't even imagine myself living in Pennsylvania. I mean, I just couldn't even. And I said, like, where the Amish are? No. They said, yeah. So I applied, I got the position, we moved there. And that was it was a difficult move, but it was a good move. That was the first time I think I really learned about the Mennonite Church and all of its different Mennonite groups. Because in Houston, we had one church in a city of 4 million. In Lancaster, you had a Mennonite church at every corner. And every one of those churches was different. So I really did learn a lot about the church. And my work, I began to be more centered around work around immigration and anti-racism. Those are the things that really pulled me and I became the most interested in. And I was there for 11 years as the director. And I loved my job. But it was a job where, as a woman, I probably wasn't going to go any further than I was. And I realized that. And the more and more experience I had, I felt like I was doing other people's work. And I'll just say it, mainly other men's work, and they were getting credit for it. And so I decided, you know what, I need to go out there and see. And when I started thinking about that, I got a call from the denomination asking, would I like to apply for a position there? And so I went to the denomination for 2 years as the intercultural director. I did that for 2 years. And then my mother got sick for a little while, and like, she's 89 now, and I decided I'll probably need to really go back to the West Coast. I didn't really know what I was going to do. Leo was ready to retire from pastoring, and I thought, no, I don't think I want to pastor. I just really had this passion for peace and justice. But then the Pacific Northwest called me as their conference minister, and so I came out here to Portland, and I did that for a couple of years, which I loved again. I mean, I've loved every job I've had. And I did that for 2 years. And then it was Irvin Stutzman called, I guess, our board chair, and get permission to talk to me about coming back to the denomination. And that was because during that time, that whole immigration thing was happening in Phoenix, Arizona, and all of that. It was a tough decision whether I go back or I stay. But one of my conditions was if I go back to the denomination, I have to stay in Portland on the West Coast because of my mom. She's older, and I wanted to be closer to my family. So I did go back to the denomination. And so for 9 years, I did the transformative peacemaking position that Sue Parker now has. And then when Glenn became the executive director, he asked me if I'd be the associate executive director. And so that's what I'm doing now. And I love working with Glenn, and you know, we make a good team, and I like it because he's direct and I'm direct, and it works out great. So that's how I got.
Thanks, Iris. And I think it's one of the things that you said about how maybe this is a denomination where directness and a willingness to engage, especially directly with conflict, isn't always something that's valued. And so I think that Iris did not reveal this, but she is an Enneagram 8. And so I think that's also why it's been so helpful for me, because as also an Enneagram 8, being able to sort of see how you have been able to cultivate the fullness of yourself in a tradition that doesn't always necessarily value that directness. And I'm just so curious about how you sort of found your way in a tradition, like fully embodying who you are about those things, with people who do tend to be passive aggressive, and especially in more traditional settings. And yeah, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I think for me, it took me a while. I think working for MCC was my training. I feel like I had training wheels while I was working for MCC. I learned a lot there. And I began to realize how people actually fight in the Mennonite Church. Is very passive aggressive, never direct. And so like when I would be direct about something, you know, people would get offended, or, you know, why did you get mad? And then, you know, I was confused for a while because I thought, well, you know, when you're passive aggressive, that, you know, that's being angry and that's being mad, but, you know, it's a different way of showing it. But I do remember after I've been there for a few years, and we had a staff meeting, and 2 staff people were fighting with each other. And then, you know, after the staff meeting, I had said, you know, let's get together with these 2 staff. Let's get together in an hour and let's talk this out. And so this person that was new, and he was African American, he said to me, "Was something happening at the meeting?" And I said, "Yeah, you know, 2 staff people were fighting." "They were?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, you know, I had explained to him it was passive aggressive, but everyone there knew, except for this new person, he didn't know. And so one thing I found out was it was really important for me as a person of color, like when we have new people of color that come in, to really help them navigate the culture, the Mennonite culture, because there are some specific things that are important for people of color to know, because if you don't, I don't think you would last very long. And one of the other pieces that I learned early on in MCC is that it's not valued unless it's written. Like documents and paper are very important.
Mhm.
That's different when you come from a more oral tradition, where interpersonal relationships and talking things out and agreeing to things without putting them on paper and stuff is the way you do business. But I learned very early on that writing memos, documenting, rationalizing why you did this or that was very, very important. And that was a big learning curve for me. I mean, part of it is because I hate writing. That's not my favorite thing to do. But I had to discipline myself to become better at writing and to do it. So I think that was a big one.
Yeah, and appreciating, Iris, how also in this conversation you are pulling out for us that this is that the we exist in a patriarchal tradition, but also in a tradition of whiteness that is set up in such a way that in both overt and subtle ways that our culture of whiteness makes it so that there's always sort of an adaptation that has to happen from people of color who come in. Like you're saying, I have to like take someone under my wing to help them sort of navigate the system of whiteness that doesn't. And so even as we're talking about dismantling patriarchy, that we can't really talk about that without also talking about the ways that we need to be dismantling the culture of whiteness in our tradition as well. Yeah, I was also hearing something else that you were saying that caught my ear is that that patriarchy is bad for men, which I think is, I think that's something that we talk about in Women in Leadership as well. That when this sense of you're trying to destroy something I love, I think there is that sort of sense of you're trying to shake something up, or I feel you're trying to take something away from me. And like the reason you stuck with this institution is because you want people to be free, like all people to be free from the ways that these systems of destruction and death have formed us for conflict, for like shutting off our men's feelings, their ability to show their emotions, to have to protect other men, even in the face of really terrible accusations of sexual abuse. And and I wonder if there's been ways for you to be able to, like, have people been able to sort of understand like your institutional love, or has it mostly felt like there's been pushback, or maybe some kind of combination of those things?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think that most people that really know me and work with me, I think they know I really love the church. And so when I speak, when I try to lift up something that I think we really need to talk about, it's important for us to talk about, I don't do it because, well, I don't do it for fun, because it's no fun. But I really do it because I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the church can change. If we aren't hopeful that the church can change, I mean, then I don't know what we're doing. I mean, I think I have to have that hope. And I also think that oftentimes, like a few times at board meetings, when I've seen some stuff around racism happen or whatever, I usually write a paper of kind of analyzing what happened and the systemic way it happened, and then what the consequences of what the actions were and how it affected people. And at first, when I would present it, let's say to the moderator or to, whoever, they would get defensive, and I try to explain, I'm not writing this as a critique in the sense of I'm mad at the church or whatever. I said, I'm writing this because this is important. And I think that if the church could see this, if we could see what we do to each other, and how it plays out and how we diminish each other in some of the actions, we can be a better church. And I guess that's the part where my directness hits a lot against the more going around the situation. I'm more like, bang, here it is, and let's talk about it. And I know that's intimidating. I'm only 4'10", and one time someone said to me, so and so is afraid of you. This person was like 6'4", and I thought to myself, afraid of me. But I think it just has to do because of my directness. You know, I've never heard anyone, but I think it's because I want to move forward. I want the church to heal. I want, church to be a place where people can come and feel welcomed and feel loved and heal from all kinds. We all have healing to do, every one of us. And to say that we don't, then I'd wonder about you if someone told me, well, like I'm perfect or I have nothing to work on. We all do. And yeah, we just have to be open to that.
Yeah. And thinking about that hope that you have for the Mennonite Church, I wonder if there are positive changes that you've seen over your time working in the church, and just what, and maybe even some things that you're hopeful for that you see starting to emerge in our tradition.
Yeah. Well, I think we have a lot more women on boards, which, it really does make a difference. And we have a lot more women in leadership positions. Um, and and one of the things I find exciting is that we have more and more people joining the Mennonite Church because of our Anabaptist theology.
Mhm.
People see something in our theology that excites them and they want to be a part of. And so that's why I joined. And when I hear other people still joining for that same reason, it really gives me hope. It really excites me that we do have a treasure here. And a lot of times, we don't appreciate it. Um, and it's not perfect, like I said, but I find that it is unique to a lot of other places people could look for. But that's one of the things I find. I think the church, and I'm going to say that this is kind of um, the church is becoming more transparent. We still have a long ways to go. I'm not saying we're there, but I think in the last few years, especially when uh, we had the sexual abuse issue, and the denomination promised to release the report as written without doing any editing. And the church actually did it. And that wasn't without a lot of pain, a lot of fighting within leadership, because we've always allowed lawyers to dictate what goes out and what goes in. And I think that the argument on this one that I feel that women won on this one was that, are we going to be dictated by lawyers, or are we going to be dictated by God and do the right thing? And I don't know. I think finally something must have clicked. And at that time, the leadership of the church took I know it took a lot of faith on their part to go ahead and just do it. It was the right thing to do. We still have a lot of work to do. People are still afraid, because, well, what if we get sued? What if this? What if that? But I'm just saying, let's just try and do the right thing, and the right thing is to do what we would do for people that, that we love and care for. So yeah, that's another thing. I think one of the things that still I still struggle with the church on is that the church always seems to lag behind in important issues. If we talk about racism, for example, my thinking, why wasn't the church ahead of that? Why wasn't the church leading it? I mean, not that there weren't segments of the church doing it, but I mean as a whole, as a church. And for me, I feel the same way about LGBTQ inclusion. Why aren't we leading in that? Why are we lagging behind? Why are we being pulled? I mean, when I think about it, I think, if we look at scripture, it talks about the banquet table and that everyone's invited to it. To me, it's like it's a no-brainer, that we have to include everyone that wants to come and be part of the church, and to love them. Um, and so that I always struggle with that piece of why the church in some very important issues seems to lag behind. And of course, there's a bunch of reasons for that, but it's still a part that I struggle with.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm curious about, about why that is, and if there is something to the sense that there's going to be unity around a subject like that if we just spend the next 20 years talking about this, eventually somebody's gonna like break on this, or like I don't know what, I keep thinking like they figured out this whole like Gentiles don't need to be circumcised thing, which was like a pretty big deal in like a week or something in Acts. And here we are like on year 25 discussing the membership guidelines. And I don't know if that again is sort of the culture of the Mennonite of the Mennonite church, or if it's just, is this like another tool of patriarchy or whiteness to like, if you can't make a decision, you like you just stop the process. Like, I don't know, I think, Iris, you have so much insight into this, but like, why is it we are like, it does feel like we are lagging behind?
Well, let me remind you about, the decision about the meat. I mean, in Acts, like further down in the chapter, he reverts back, Peter.
Right. Yeah.
So, I think it's this dance we do about
Yeah.
make major decisions and major changes, of moving one step forward, or two steps forward, one step back. I mean, it's just, it feels that way. I don't think it's just the Mennonite church. I was privileged with Catherine Pitts. We went to the Methodist annual meeting about 4 years ago. And the big topic then there was LGBTQ inclusion also. Now, Methodists are more complicated because their yearly assembly is global. It's not just U.S. churches. And so it was quite a dynamic and hot discussion there. And I told Catherine, hey, how does it feel that we're on the other side of the, we're the observers for once, watching this happen. So I don't think it's just the Mennonite church. I think it's the Christian church in the U.S. I mean, almost every denomination except for the UCCs. I mean, because they long time ago became inclusive, but all the other churches have been struggling with it. And slowly, it's changing. And like what you had talked about people say, well, why don't we do some Bible study and, like we're all going to agree. But we know Anabaptists. I mean, if you've read the book, what's his name? Pilgrim. What's his first name? Marpeck.
Pilgrim Marpeck.
If you read his book, I think that's one of the best book and insights about Anabaptists and their theology. Back then, there were so many streams of Anabaptist theology, it was crazy. And we still have it. And we have the variety even in our own denomination. Right. So I don't have any illusions that we're all going to all of a sudden have one big Bible study and we're all going to come to the same conclusion. I think it happens congregation by congregation, conference by conference. I mean, it's the way as Anabaptists, it's the practice first, then our theology changes.
Right.
That's been historically how we have done things. Whether it's the best way, or the only way. We know it's not the only way, but I don't know if it's the best way, but that's part of who we are. That's part of our DNA. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the other trends I wanted to talk to you about, Iris, is in women in leadership. And these are, we don't have official numbers on this or anything, but we have been hearing a number of reports of women pastors leaving pastoral ministry in MCUSA. It's not always, some people go to other jobs, and so it's not quite, but other people actually leave pastoring altogether. And the other trend that we've been hearing about, not just in the Mennonite church, but I think in the church in the US, is that women are choosing to go into chaplaincy ministries rather than pastoring in church settings. And of course, there's always multiple factors that are playing out, but there is something in there, I think, about the fact that women are still facing barriers to thriving in church-based ministry. I just wonder if we could take a little time to hear about what your thoughts are from that, and what we can do to address a culture in the Mennonite church that is not always life-giving for women.
Yeah. I have a few ideas about that. I think, one of them is having to change our institutional culture of how we do things. We've always done things the way that men have modeled how to do this and that. But, a long time ago, maybe 30 years ago, there was a book called Women's Way of Knowing. And in that book, is that as women, we may do things in a very different way. And for me, it's a gift. I think it's a gift because it's another dimension of humanity. If we only have men doing it only the way men do it, that's only part of humanity. To include women and other people to influence our culture of our institution, that brings all of who we are, all of humanity in it. So I think cultural change in an institution has to happen. If women are going, or anyone is really going to be there. And that means, how do we do meetings? How do we make decisions? How do we have discussions? And the whole idea of interdependency, which I think more women understand that language versus competition. So, how we do that, I think is going to be important. And I think we have to do that because women, have things to bring. They are leaders in their own right. And they need to model those different kinds of leadership for the church, but not just for the church, but I think like even for our own children, that there are other ways of being together that includes everybody, that is not just singular in how we look at things. I also, one things I've had to learn, and it's been been a difficult learning, is this whole thing about emotions. And I really hate it when, like, if I get emotional on something and then someone says to me, oh yeah, Latinas, they get all emotional, or they're passionate, or they say something as though that diminishes what I'm saying, that what I'm saying isn't important. It's emotional. And it when people say that, it's kind of like a buzzword. I mean, it really infuriates me when I hear that. Um, but I think that that's important discussion we have to have, and that's when I talked about patriarchy also diminishes men, because if we look at the traditional way of, boys don't cry, all that kind of stuff, it diminishes them of their own being able to tap into their own emotions. And so again, I think that it's a disservice also to men. I think the other piece that I've had to learn to do, which has been a lot harder, is calling men on their stuff when it's happening. And I'll just give you an example. I was at a meeting, and we all know, I was at a meeting and I had this idea and I shared it, and the person said, okay, thank you. So then 3 people down, and then another person, almost word for word, a male, gives the idea, and the person says, that's a great idea, and writes it out and says, and tells this person that we're going to have you be the head and, start this thing and everything. And I thought, okay, do I just sit in silence and get just mad? And then I thought, no. So I stood up and I said, excuse me. I said, but that was my idea. And I looked at the person and I said, and it was my idea. And he said, yeah, I know. He said, but I didn't think they heard you. So no, I said, you took my idea. And that happens a lot to women about ideas, and not just ideas, but also that whole mansplaining thing that happens, when I'm sometimes when I'm co-teaching, even with a good male friend, co-teaching with him, and then he feels he has to re-explain what I just said because I didn't say it the way he would have said it, or he thinks it should have been said. So I'm trying, I mean, I'm trying to just name it when it happens. I'm tired of sitting there just spewing, getting mad, and then leaving and being mad. And I'm thinking, you know what? I have to let that anger go, and I might as well just do it right then and there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think that also it helps that person start to realize when they do that. Because if no one ever says anything to somebody that keeps doing that, interrupting women or, explaining things for women, if no one ever says anything to that person, they may not even realize they're doing that. So, I think we have an obligation to do it and just say it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I've been guessing that there are still quite a few churches in Mennonite Church USA where women most likely are still pioneering pastors in those churches, and certainly LGBTQ people are, who also are experiencing. So what does it mean to be the first in that situation? Yeah, and the other something that sort of comes to mind is the costliness of how personal and how pastoral ministry in a church setting, it really is like your whole life. Like we talk about boundaries, that's important, but it's also, and I'm sure you know this from working with churches in Pacific Northwest Conference, and being in churches, but people can hurt you in very personal ways as a pastor. And I really think that women, queer people weigh in the balance how much they want to be the person who has to try to like break some of those walls down. And it's not always clear what sort of the support networks are for you along the way. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's there's a couple of things that for me that happened. Like I said, when I did the Enneagram, I became more clear of where I should head. I mean, I guess I knew I could I could probably take a lot. Not that I like it, but I mean, I felt I could, and I could stand up for myself. I had to think through all this, but the part I really was more difficult for me working in the church is that there always you have to go in always knowing this, that there will always be compromises you have to make.
Mhm.
And I think there's a point where you have to say that's one compromise I can't make and be willing to leave over it.
Yeah.
And I have done that.
Mhm.
And it's hard, especially when you like your job. But there comes a point where the ethics for me, that is more important than the job. And I think that's hard. But I think women or LGBTQ people on the margins that are in the church really have to think about those things. And I think when you're early in your career, I think it's more scary. I think now that I'm older, and getting ready to retire sometime soon, I can, I think, well, I could go work at McDonald's if I have to my last year. But anyway, I'm just saying, but it is scary. I mean, I think we have to weigh the cost. I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't weigh the cost, or we think that, we're not going to be affected in some way. And you're right, the hurt can be really devastating, because you're being hurt by an institution that you believe should love and care for you. And then when it hurts you, it's deeper than being hurt by someone outside the church.
Yeah. Question from the chat. Wondering if you get the sense that men are doing the work in our denomination to dismantle patriarchy, and what we can do to help them along in that process.
I think some of the issues has been that we have mixed up the work of sexism and patriarchy. For me, sexism is one of the outcomes of patriarchy. We haven't really looked at patriarchy, and I think part of the reason is, again, we have some very theological differences when we think about patriarchy. Because one of the biggest defenders of patriarchy, and I hate to say it, have been white women. Mm-hmm. In my experience working, they defend it, and you have to understand in the system of race, they defend it because, especially white patriarchy. I talk about as white patriarchy because in the U.S. that's what it is. I mean, in white patriarchy, because white women and their children, there is some benefit to it. They do get some benefit from that.
Right.
So I think it's hard. And like I said, it's a system that we've all grown up in, even myself. And sometimes you find yourself protecting it and not even knowing that you're doing that. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think we've even scratched the surface of patriarchy in the Mennonite Church. it's what's that Star Trek saying? Uh, the beginning where it says where no one has gone before. Kind of. We've talked about it, but have we really dealt with it? But I think there is some stuff happening. There was curriculum that being produced, and I'm hopefully we're going to get some men and women trained on patriarchy, and hopefully that'll be something that the church can use. So I know there's some work being done, but I think we're in the beginning. We're just scratching the surface.
Yeah. Thanks, Iris. Also wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about how we sort of navigate both helping to dismantle patriarchy without finding ourselves as the savior in this position, but still creating space for change. And maybe this gets back to that question that you got a little bit to as well, of when do you just say, like, I can't go with you any further? And maybe you've seen that in some places in your life.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think there are roles. I mean, one of the things that I have really enjoyed, and in the church is, we have hope for the future for people of color. We get together every year. And I love it for many reasons, because first, we don't have to explain ourselves to each other. And we can be ourselves. And we can question things, and it's a safe place. And a lot of times we also talk about our white allies, like, because we appreciate the work that they do, and we know sometimes for them it's a sacrifice. And so, what are their roles, and what is our roles? Time in MCC, when I was doing a workshop, I came up with this idea, and I think it's a good exercise. We had people of color write a job description for white allies, and we had the White Caucus write a job description for white allies. And then we came together to see, what did this mean for white people? What does this mean for people of color? And then we hashed it out as to what was really realistic. And people of color could say, we just can't go there. I mean, the hurt would be too much, and we have our limits. And so, if that's the case, then we have conversation with the white allies of, okay, so then what does that mean? Then what can you do? When can you step in and speak up? Because I can't. So I think that can also happen between men and women. There are times, where, men can speak up for women when it really isn't safe for women to say something or challenge something. But I think it's important that you have a relationship with people that you work with, and an understanding and boundaries of what you can do. And also, I think white people need their own boundaries. There's some things that different parts of your life you're willing to do, and there are other times in your life where that's too big of a risk, but maybe later down the road it's not. So you just have to consider all those kind of things when you're talking about, when you're working with white allies, or if men and women are working together about patriarchy. And the other thing is, have to be realistic. I mean, early on, I was too idealistic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I thought I was going to help change the church in 1 year. you know, you begin to realize that, really understand human nature more deeply and understand how change actually works. And it does happen. It's just sometimes it takes just a lot longer than we had hoped for.
Yeah. Iris, looks like we're right at 8 o'clock. I'm sorry I didn't get to all the questions. This has been such sacred and rich space. I'm so grateful for this hour with you, and want to thank you for your time, and also invite everyone present to continue to deepen these investigations around dismantling patriarchy. There is a new curriculum that's coming out that Iris mentioned from Women in Leadership on anti-patriarchy. As we heard Iris say, that that is work that is internal to white women, and for our dismantling and the recognition of the places where we have been defenders of white patriarchy in our churches and our institutions. And that is also to invite men into that space as well. So please be on the lookout for that. Our final time of holding this space together of women doing theology will be a time of worship, encouragement, and a word of hope on November 21st at 7 p.m. With Reverend Addie Banks. I'm really looking forward to that. I feel like we need what we need will be there on November 21st at 7 p.m. Continue to look at the Women in Leadership page of Mennonite Church USA for information about that. And blessings to each of you as you go about the work that is before you. And have a good night.